G'day everyone, welcome to another video by myself, Andrew DFT. And of course this is part 1 for the How to Clone Scout Trooper web series. And we'll be kicking off by starting at the top and working our way down. So of course, first up is the helmet. But before we jump into the tutorial, I want to get the groundwork out of the way. First things first is if you want to follow this, you can of course. All the videos will be uploaded here for free, as well as the documents can be obtained via the link in the description box below for free as well. I was going to charge it like I have for many of my other larger web series, but this one I decided to let go for free. So you're welcome, and there shouldn't be any reason to hold you back from making some cool stuff like this guy here. But that aside, in this tutorial you're going to be using two different types of foam, 1/2 inch thick foam and about 1/4 inch thick as well. Majority of the armor will be made of the 1/4 inch as it's nice and thinner and can be obtained and molded to fit more intricate pieces of detail rather than this being a bit more thick. But it's up to you on which one you want to approach, but I have made most of the armor out of this 1/4 inch. So to show you right off the bat, this is what you're going to be achieving by the end of this tutorial. This is the helmet build for this. Of course, this is the basic one, so if you want to add antennas, extra details, you can of course. And remember, by the end of the construction, you might not be happy with it, but go ahead and do it again and you'll definitely get a better result each time. The helmet fits pretty much everyone. Ow. I clipped my nose. But it is a good helmet, and it was a rather hard design to kind of achieve in foam, but I think this has done a decent enough job. And of course, once you paint it up, put mud on it, it will definitely sell the design. But let's go ahead and jump right in and get started on the build. Alright, so to kick it off, go ahead and grab the templates required for the helmet. You should be able to identify them pretty easily. Once you've got them allocated, we'll start to grab this individual paper piece here and cut out this main circle. We'll start from the top of the helmet and work our way down, as that way it builds the structure for where we need to apply the detail. We're going to start it off with 1/2 inch foam, grab that and then transfer the circle template on and cut it out. What you can do is use the arrow to identify where the front of this helmet will be, and you can carefully line it out by putting a nice dash there. Moving on, we can go ahead and cut out this section of the template. This will be the brim that goes around the circle. You can transfer that onto the 1/4 inch foam and cut it out as needed. You can be very careful in making sure that these cuts are nice and 90 degree. You don't want to bevel these just yet. Well, you don't actually want to bevel them at all. This is literally going to wrap around the helmet. But where we've got that nice front line indicated, you can transfer it to the back and then add in the back line. This is where you're going to fold everything around, so that way there will be a seam, but it will be on the back section, so you'll never actually see it unless you turn it around, but you can still cover it if you want. Then carefully wrap it around. If you do have a bit of excess overhang like I do here, simply cut it free, so that way when it wraps around perfectly, it should be seamless. Go ahead and apply the art cement or the glue, whatever your adhesive of choice is, and it should sit in there relatively nice. Now what we're going to do is add a depth line about maybe 1/4 inch into the foam. Then you can add a bevel line about halfway through the foam up the top. Now what you're going to do is take the nice sharp craft blade and actually trim the edge of this between those two lines. This is going to round the design so it's not a 90-degree angle like it was a minute or two ago. Now it's going to have this nice kind of curvature to it, and once we apply heat to it, that'll really smooth itself out and look rather nice. Now we can move on to the brim. This is going to be the main support for the back of the helmet and for the majority of the helmet in total. Cut the templates out, tape them together, and then transfer that large section onto the foam, onto the 1/4 inch foam, so that way it can wrap around nicely. You can then take the template again and make a smaller piece, about maybe 1 inch thick, but still at the same length. And first of all, you're going to wrap that around. Now this should be on 1/2 and 1/2 of the side of the helmet, so that way it's pointing towards the front. So it starts at the back and wraps its way around the front. The main center point, of course, where your glue is where the seam meets for that previous point. Once that's marked itself on and sticking there relatively nice, you can heat up the piece, the larger one, and we'll go ahead and wrap that around exactly the same. Now of course it's not going to wrap around the full amount, that's just because of the thickness of the foam, but that's fine, we want that to happen. So go ahead and glue it in. You should have the overhang, but it should still look like that. Now we can move on to making it even bigger. And bigger we shall. Go ahead and actually make a duplicate, an exact same piece from the template, so pretty much a secondary one. The reason why we're doing this is because it's going to indicate where the middle line is for all the future construction we're about to do. But for now, simply heat it up with a heat gun and go ahead and glue it directly under the main segment we did. Try and keep it as straight as you can. It will kind of bend out naturally like it is now, but that's fine. As long as you monitor that and you try and keep it as straight as possible, you shouldn't run into any issues. Once that of course is dried, we'll go ahead and grab the next section, which is this front muzzle area. go ahead and transfer that onto the foam, being sure it is a continuous design, not in two separate pieces. You can't really build this if it's two separate. Make sure it's one continuous by simply flipping that template. You will now notice we have this kind of dashed line indicating we have a bevel of some kind. What you can do is cut that free so it's two separate templates, and then use that as a negative spacing to transfer a line where that dashed line was onto the reverse side of the foam, the textured non-facing side. Once you have that in, we'll go ahead and dash a scoring line in about halfway through the foam. Be careful because this is 1/4 of an inch, so it is already pretty thin, but you want to cut that in half. Not all the way through, just in half to allow it to have this nice bend. You can then go and grab a heat gun and heat up the foam so that way it's of course malleable and flexible, and then you can simply go and glue the two edges. You should be able to see where that designated line is, of course, between the two main back structures. Glue it in the bottom section and it should wrap around rather nice. It will look a bit disjointed now, but that's fine. It'll all come together when we do this next piece. Now where we're of course cut in halfway through the foam, you can now go and actually apply some hot glue while bending it back. Opening up that crevice and putting glue inside it should cool and give us this nice edge. Like you can see there, it kind of bends out. That's just a part of the natural design the original concept has, so of course we want to try and replicate it as best as possible. Then you can go ahead and cut out these two templates marked on the paper, transfer that onto some 1/2 inch foam thickness, so that way it's a bit more strong and holds the front of the helmet together, and then you can go ahead and bevel the edges that I'm doing now. We're just doing 3 sides, the top side, not the bottom. Make sure you cut it in on about a 45-degree angle, and then we're going to do the same to the top edge here. Not the bottom, just the side, the top curvature, and then of course down to the other side. Then what you can do is go and grab some hot glue, and we're going to start to actually glue these pieces in. These will require you to actually be a bit patient and hold it there, but when we do apply it in, you can start with the top. You want to give it a bit of a terraced effect. You don't want to glue it in flush. You'll see now that I have this nice kind of lip to it. That just allows the design to look a bit more 3D and fill it up in a far more like beneficial way. Then what of course you can do is go ahead and glue the bottom section in, and you'll see that clearly defined 3D lip there is there, and ideally that's what you want to achieve, but it all should just slot in rather nice, and you can see it's really started to pull around the front and the main core of this front facing helmet piece. Now we can go start putting in the eye goggles section. So grab the template and go ahead and actually transfer that onto a 1/4 inch foam. You don't need a super thick one, you just need a nice thin one here. So go ahead and then cut out the internal segment and actually draw in where the interior visor will actually go. Leave it there for now. We're not actually going to do the cutting out until this is fully assembled. But what you can do is go ahead and just glue this dead center right on top of the nose section. It should slot in perfectly, but you will just have to hold it there to make sure it sits in and glues nicely to try and keep it as seamless as possible. Then what you're going to do is after you've completed that, we can go ahead and actually start to add in all the under eye segments. Now you can go ahead and cut those out of the template. There should only be one, so you're going to have to flip the template to make the other side. Then what we'll do is to allow these to fit in together, we'll just quickly add a nice beveled segment to the internal eye duct section, which is of course where this will join to the goggles. We just need to cut that piece out. Everything else should slot into position perfectly. Apply some heat, then go ahead and kind of bend it ever so slightly. You'll just see the natural formation as it goes, and then simply by gluing one side at a time, slot that into position, and you should have both sides sitting there nice, and it should really complete and flow around the helmet. Next we'll go ahead and grab the visor bridge template. This is of course the part that wraps over the goggle and gives it the clearly defined scout trooper look. So grab that template, flip it over, being sure to make this template as a whole piece, so that way it's not two separate sections. Then what we'll do is we'll cut out this rectangle you can see here, use it as a negative spacing for the template, and transfer in where that rectangle should sit, of course being on both sides of the template. You can then actually cut that out completely from the foam, and what we'll do is we'll add a depth line about halfway through that layer and cut that in half. Then what we'll do is we'll actually glue it back into position on a different terraced level, so that way it gives it a bit of a 3D appearance. Of course, that is achieved pretty easy, and it creates a very nice look and feel for what we're going for. After that's completed, you can cut the dashed line and make the segment into 2 different pieces. Then go ahead and transfer the template as a negative space on the opposite side and put in that dashed line. This is going to act pretty much like we did before with a nice kind of bend. It's going to allow for a more cleaner bend rather than just trying to wrap it around. So what you're going to do is cut in halfway through the foam very carefully and with a very sharp craft blade, and then come back in on both sides with a 45-degree angle to meet that depth. You want to be extremely careful here because you don't want to cut all the way through the foam. because then you might have made a serious issue and you might have to restart it because it won't look as good. Once you've successfully done that, you can then go ahead and apply some heat and then put a weight on top of it to make this thing as flat as possible. Because right now I'm assuming it's a bit bent just because the natural tension of the foam. But once you've got it flat and it's cooled down, you can go ahead and apply some glue into those nice kind of scored areas and then wrap it around as much as you can. Once it's completely cured and now you've got the glue standing by itself, you can go ahead and glue this segment via the brim top section into the circle. It should slot in perfectly because that's how the template has been set up. Then just continue through once everything's starting to dry in its stages and apply this onto the helmet. It's really not that difficult. You're just going to have to really look where you're putting this down before you actually apply the glue. That way you don't get any unnecessary issues obtaining due to the glue not sticking or the glue being put into areas that isn't supposed to have it and becoming a design issue. Just take your time, be careful, and you should get it no problem. Once that is completely cured, we can go in and actually cut out the visor now that we know it's not going to move anywhere. So carefully take your craft blade and go in and cut that whole segment out as best as you can. Now what we'll do is we'll start to move on to the front detailing. Of course, we've got these two segments here to cut out of the foam. And then you can transfer the templates onto the smaller pieces of foam like so. Now we are going to make these a bit thinner. Right now if we stuck them on, they'd be a bit disjointed and a bit too thick. So go ahead at a depth line, and what we'll do is we'll actually trim this front section to kind of slope it around to make it not as 90 degrees as it currently is. Once you've done that nice curvature around the tip of it, we can go then and slice this piece in half to make it a lot thinner than it currently is, and to get rid of that textured side, which of course is going to make it protrude and it's not going to sit as flush as possible. You can then transfer the vertical lines, I think there's 5 of them, into it as carefully as you can and evenly spaced as you can. Then simply cut apart each segment and glue it back into position. It should sit there right at the base on that glue line. Then we're going to pretty much repeat the process. Go ahead and grab these 3 segments, put it onto the foam, and then what we'll do is we'll add a depth line about halfway through each of those layers and then cut them in half just to make them less thick than they actually are. Then what we'll do is grab the template for the back section. You will notice that it's one small piece. You'll have to flip it where it says middle and make that a long solid piece of foam. You can do this out of the 1/4 inch, and then you can do the exact same with the secondary piece as well out of the 1/4 inch. Now what you will notice is of course that they are rather curved. This is going to allow it to kind of bevel together and wrap around the back of the helmet. So to do that, what we'll do is we'll actually bevel the edges that are the longest on both of these pieces. Not the shorter side, but the longest lines. What you can then do is heat up both of these layers of foam, apply some hot glue in between the seams and glue these together. And as you do, you'll slowly notice that they kind of wrap around, giving us that detail that will of course be added to fit to the back of the helmet. Now you will notice that the beveled edge is rather sharp. Don't worry about that, we'll actually fix that later and apply a process that I like to use to kind of make everything a bit rounded and seamless. But for now we'll go ahead and add in this segment here. This is of course going to be the earpiece, I guess you could say. Transfer that onto the foam, being sure to flip it to have a left and a right, and then go ahead and glue it into position. It sits back maybe ½ inch from the actual end of this, but just hold it in place until it's completely glued together, and once it's solid you can slowly start to wrap it around. Now this isn't designed to fit all the way around the back, so just make sure you place it in about halfway to make sure it sits nice and symmetrical on both sides. Now what I was talking about before is that this beveled edge is rather sharp. What you can actually do is go cut the tip of it off. This will make it a bit more rounded, but not clean enough that you'd like. You can then actually go add some art clay, which I'll put a tutorial link for in the description box below, which allows you to go ahead and cover these seams to make it all a lot rounded. It also adds a nice strengthener to the helmet, which is ideal. And then of course all you need to do is cover it up in PVA glue or plaster it, whatever you wish, and then add a visor, which of course a tutorial is given in the PDF. But that's it, part 1 done and dusted. Remember, there is the little visor pictograph tutorial kind of thing inside the PDF document, which shows you just how I went about putting this in. I literally just used basic green acrylic sheets. Anything you can find really that looks plasticky, you can personally see through, is ideal. It doesn't have to be tinted. I mean, you can probably see my eyes through this helmet, exactly the same as this, the exact same material, but you can go ahead and post-production and make sure you don't see your eyes by tinting it out or darkening it if you wish. But like I mentioned, do this again. If you're not very happy by the outcome, you just try it again, try it again. Each time you do, it will become better. I promise you that. It just happens with experience. So, thank you for watching and following along with part 1. If you enjoyed the tutorial, please give it a like. If you reckon you've got friends who want to build a Scout Trooper, throw them a link. Let's get as many clones into the world as possible. Now you can jump ahead and get into part 2. So go ahead and click the link at the end of the video and follow your way through the tutorial as we go and make this clone. Thank you for watching, guys. Catch you later.